You don't have to be alone. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to change everything. Emily Parker never thought she would hear those words. As she stood outside the grand ballroom of a lavish wedding reception, her heart sank. The golden light shined through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the elegant decorations inside. The laughter and chatter from the guests only made her feel more isolated. She had always been a fighter, balancing her demanding job as a single mother with the never-ending responsibilities of raising her 6-year-old son, Ethan. But tonight, at this wedding, she felt like the odd one out. She had come alone. Not because she wanted to, but because she didn't have a choice. She couldn't ask her co-workers to come, and her friends were all busy with their own lives. As she walked into the reception hall, the eyes of the other guests immediately fell on her. She forced a smile, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling of being the outsider. The tables were beautifully arranged, but all she could think about was how empty her seat looked at the table meant for couples. She didn't belong here, and everyone could see it. "Excuse me, miss? Would you mind if I joined you?" The voice broke through her thoughts, and Emily looked up to see a man standing beside her table. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. His suit, tailored perfectly to fit his broad shoulders, exuded a quiet confidence. He didn't look like someone who would be interested in talking to someone like her. She was just a single mom, a woman who had to scrape by every day to make sure Ethan had everything he needed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought you might need someone to talk to," the man continued, his gaze softening as he noticed her unease. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. Who was this man? Why would he want to sit with her? I don't want to intrude, she muttered, feeling self-conscious. The man gave a small smile, as though he had expected her hesitation. "I'm Alexander Hayes," he said, holding out his hand. "I'm sure we could both use some company tonight. This wedding doesn't seem like much fun, does it?" Emily looked at his hand for a moment before reluctantly shaking it. Emily Parker. "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said, his voice calm and warm. "Tell you what, why don't we pretend for a while that we're together? Just for the evening. You'll have someone to talk to, and I'll have someone to keep the boring small talk away." Emily blinked, stunned by his suggestion. Pretend? What did he mean by that? "What do you mean?" she asked, frowning slightly. Alexander's smile grew wider, and he gestured toward the empty chair across from her. "Well, you see, I'm not exactly a fan of weddings. And I'm sure you're feeling a bit out of place too. So, how about we make a deal? You sit here with me, and we'll both pretend that we're a couple. We can enjoy the night without the awkward questions. No one will bother us. What do you say?" Emily stared at him, her mind racing. Why would a man like him want to help her? He was well-dressed, obviously wealthy, and confident. The kind of person she never imagined she'd cross paths with. But there was something about his voice, something genuine in his eyes, that made her feel at ease. Maybe it was the idea of having someone by her side, even if it was just for a night. "All right," she said finally, her voice soft. "Why not? It's not like I have anything to lose." As soon as she agreed, Alexander pulled out the chair and sat down across from her, and the rest of the evening began to shift. The air felt different, lighter somehow. For the first time all night, Emily didn't feel invisible. She wasn't alone. And as the conversation flowed, the discomfort she'd felt earlier began to fade. Alexander's charm was undeniable, but it was more than that. He was attentive, kind, and genuinely interested in her. They spoke about everything, her life as a single mom, his work in the business world, and even the awkwardness of social events like this one. The more they talked, the more Emily realized that she was enjoying herself. She was laughing, something she hadn't done in a long time. For once, she didn't have to worry about how she looked or whether people were judging her. She could just be herself. And she couldn't help but wonder, who was this mysterious man, and why had he chosen to spend the evening with her? Was it just a simple act of kindness, or was there more to him than met the eye? As the evening unfolded, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over her. Alexander's presence was magnetic, but not in the way she expected. He wasn't the typical wealthy, aloof businessman. He wasn't trying to impress her or boast about his achievements. He was simply there, genuinely interested in her, in the life she led. As they continued to chat, the initial awkwardness between them began to melt away. The soft clinking of glasses and distant hum of wedding music seemed to fade as they found a rhythm, like they had known each other for years, not just a few minutes. Emily found herself talking about her son, Ethan, for the first time since arriving at the wedding. She had always kept her personal life separate from her professional one, but something about Alexander made her feel like it was okay to open up. "He's a handful," Emily said, smiling as she thought about her little boy. "He's only 6, but he's already asking all sorts of questions about the world. I swear, he's going to be a philosopher when he grows up." Alexander laughed, a rich, warm sound that made Emily feel even more at ease. "Sounds like he takes after his mom," he said, his smile genuine. Emily chuckled, shaking her head. "I wish. I'm just trying to make sure he has a good life, you know? I work 2 jobs to make ends meet, and I still feel like I'm falling short sometimes." Alexander's expression softened. "I can only imagine. But from what I'm hearing, you're doing more than enough. You're doing everything you can for him. That's what matters." Emily was taken aback by his kindness. She wasn't used to hearing compliments, let alone from someone like him. She'd always felt like she had to prove herself, that she had to do everything on her own. But here was Alexander, a billionaire, telling her she was enough just as she was. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "That means a lot." They both paused, the weight of the conversation settling between them for a brief moment. It was strange, this feeling of being seen, really seen, for the first time in a long while. As the night wore on, they continued to talk. The initial pretense of being a couple had faded, replaced by something much more genuine. They spoke about everything, life, dreams, fears, and even the strangest things they'd both experienced. Alexander shared a story about a business deal gone wrong, and Emily found herself laughing at his self-deprecating humor. "I guess even billionaires make mistakes," she joked. "Of course we do," he replied with a wink. "The trick is knowing how to fix them without everyone noticing." Emily laughed again, shaking her head. She never thought she'd be sitting here, laughing with a billionaire. Yet, here she was, enjoying the evening more than she had expected. But as the night began to wind down, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Alexander than he was letting on. Despite his easygoing nature and charm, there was something mysterious about him. The way he spoke about his work, the way he avoided talking too much about his personal life, it all seemed deliberate. She couldn't help but wonder why he'd chosen to spend time with her, someone so far removed from his usual circle. Maybe he was just being polite, she thought. Or maybe he was trying to escape the suffocating expectations of his own world. "So, tell me, Alexander," Emily asked, her curiosity piqued. "What's it like being a billionaire? I mean, it must be different from how I live." Alexander's eyes twinkled with amusement. "It's certainly different," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But it's not as glamorous as people think. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility. Sometimes, I wish I could just live a normal life, like you. No one expects anything from you except to be yourself." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by his words. "Normal life?" she asked, intrigued. "I thought you had everything you could ever want." He chuckled softly. "Money doesn't fix everything, Emily. It doesn't fix loneliness or the weight of constant expectations. Sometimes, I envy people like you, people who don't have to worry about living up to some image or standard." Emily looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not just the billionaire, but the man behind the title. There was a vulnerability in his words, something she hadn't expected. It made her feel a little less alone in her own struggles. "You know, you're not as different from me as you think," she said, her voice thoughtful. "We all have our battles. Maybe they're not the same, but we're all just trying to figure it out." Alexander smiled, a little wistful. "Maybe you're right." As the last song of the evening played, Emily felt a strange sense of connection with Alexander. It wasn't the kind of connection she had expected when she first sat down with him, but it was real. They weren't pretending anymore. For the first time that evening, Emily felt like she had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. As the evening continued, Emily found herself glancing at her watch. The night was slowly winding down, and the once bustling ballroom had begun to quiet. People were starting to say their goodbyes, and the dance floor had emptied, save for a few lingering couples. But Emily couldn't tear her attention away from Alexander. The easy chemistry between them had shifted, and what had started as a simple, temporary act of pretending to be a couple had turned into something deeper. Something real. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to connect with someone like him, someone so different from her world, but there it was. They were still sitting at the same table, the hum of the wedding barely noticeable to them now as they continued talking. It was strange, but Emily felt comfortable with him in a way she hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. She hadn't realized how much she missed having a conversation that wasn't about schedules, bills, or her son's latest school project. "So, what about you, Alexander?" Emily asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "What made you want to be here tonight? I mean, you didn't have to come to this wedding." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're right," he said. "I didn't have to. But sometimes, I feel like I need to escape from everything for a while. Just be normal. I guess that's why I'm so drawn to people who aren't caught up in the same world I'm in." Emily smiled softly. "That makes sense," she said. "I can't imagine what it's like to live with the weight of everything you've built. The pressure, the expectations," she trailed off, realizing she might be prying. But Alexander didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked at her with a knowing gaze. "It's not easy," he admitted. "I've had to make a lot of sacrifices along the way. Sometimes, I wonder if it's all worth it. I mean, what's the point of having all this money, all this success, if you're still lonely?" His words hit Emily harder than she expected. She had always assumed that people like Alexander had everything figured out. Money, power, influence, it all seemed so glamorous from the outside. But now, hearing him speak so openly about his struggles, she realized that even the most successful people could feel just as lost and disconnected as anyone else. She thought about her own life, the way she struggled every day to make ends meet, to balance work and motherhood, to keep her head above water. It wasn't easy, but at least she had her son, Ethan. She had her purpose. Alexander didn't seem to have that same sense of purpose, at least not in the way she understood it. "You know," Emily said after a beat, "I think you're more like me than you realize." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "Well," Emily said, leaning in slightly, "you're right. Money and success don't solve everything. It doesn't fix the loneliness, the feeling that something's missing. But at least you've got the drive, the ambition. You've built something. For me, it's my son. He's the reason I wake up every day. I don't know what I'd do without him." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I guess we both find purpose in different things, don't we?" Alexander looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess we do." The conversation shifted then, moving away from their respective challenges and into lighter territory. They began to talk about silly things, favorite movies, ridiculous moments. From their childhoods, random facts they found interesting. As the night stretched on, Emily realized she had stopped worrying about how she appeared, stopped thinking about the awkwardness of the situation. It was just her and Alexander, having an honest conversation, no masks, no pretenses. They were two people, connected by the unexpected bond they had formed that evening. By the time the last few guests began to trickle out of the ballroom, Emily felt a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just because of the enjoyable conversation with Alexander, but because she had experienced something different. She hadn't expected to leave the wedding with a new friend, or a deeper understanding of herself and her life. But here she was, smiling as she stood up from the table. "I guess this is it, huh?" Emily said, feeling a little sad to see the evening come to an end. "I can't believe how much time has passed." Alexander stood as well, his expression softening. "Yeah," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's crazy how quickly time flies when you're actually enjoying yourself." They both stood there for a moment, neither one of them quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm really glad we met tonight. I know this probably wasn't how either of us expected the evening to go, but it's been nice. More than nice, actually." Emily smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Yeah, it really has. Thanks for making it better." Alexander gave a slight nod, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment. "You're welcome. Take care of yourself, okay? And take care of Ethan. He's lucky to have you." Emily's heart fluttered slightly at his words. "I will. And you, too, Alexander. Take care of yourself, too." They exchanged a final smile before Emily turned to leave. As she walked toward the exit, she felt a strange sense of fulfillment, something she hadn't anticipated when she first arrived at the wedding. It was more than just the relief of the evening being over, it was the connection she had made with someone unexpected. It wasn't love. It wasn't even the beginning of something romantic. But it was something real. And for Emily, that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. Life quickly settled back into its routine. She returned to work, took care of Ethan, and handled the endless list of responsibilities that came with being a single mother. But there was something different now, something she couldn't quite shake off. It had been a week since the wedding, and Alexander's words still echoed in her mind. He had been so kind, so genuine. She hadn't expected that from someone like him, someone so far removed from her world. Despite the surface-level differences between them, she couldn't help but feel a connection to him that she couldn't explain. That evening had been one of the rare times in her life when she felt truly seen, not as a mother, not as an employee, but as herself. Emily didn't know if that feeling was something she should hold on to or if it was simply the fleeting excitement of an unexpected encounter. She had gotten his business card that night, but she hadn't called him, nor had he reached out to her. It was just one of those moments, she thought. She had her son to focus on, and Alexander had his life to live. But even as she tried to push the memory of their conversation out of her mind, she found herself thinking about him more than she should. It was a few days later when Emily was in the middle of an overwhelming workday that she received a message that would change things. It was from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before opening it. The message read, "Hey Emily, it's Alexander. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I wanted to check in. How are you doing?" As she stared at her phone, her heart racing a little. It had been days since the wedding, and now here he was, reaching out to her. She didn't know why, but she couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. She quickly typed a response. "Hi Alexander, I didn't expect to hear from you. I'm doing well, just busy with work and taking care of Ethan. How about you?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. A few minutes later, his response came. "Same here, just been tied up with work. But I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt like we really connected. I was wondering if you'd want to grab coffee sometime, just to catch up." Emily stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Grab coffee? She had never imagined anything like this, not with him, not with someone who lived such a different life. But there was something in his message, something in the way he phrased his words, that made her pause. Maybe he was just being friendly, maybe it wasn't a big deal. But maybe, just maybe, there was more to this connection than she had realized. After a moment of hesitation, Emily typed back, "I'd like that. How about Saturday afternoon?" She hit send and set her phone down, her mind racing. She had no idea what this would turn into, but she couldn't deny the curiosity that had settled in her chest. She hadn't expected Alexander to reach out again, and she certainly hadn't expected him to ask to meet up. But here they were. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, or even what she was hoping for. All she knew was that this was a chance to get to know him more, to explore whatever this was between them. She hadn't felt this uncertain about something in a long time, but somehow, it felt like the right thing to do. As the days passed, Emily found herself thinking more and more about the upcoming coffee date. It wasn't like her to feel this way about someone, especially someone like Alexander. She had always kept her emotions guarded, focused on the practicalities of her life. But there was something about him that made her want to take a chance, to let her guard down, even if just a little. Saturday finally arrived, and as Emily got ready, she found herself feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had dressed casually, jeans and a simple blouse, but she couldn't help but wonder if she was underdressed. It was just coffee, she reminded herself. Nothing more. When she arrived at the coffee shop, she spotted Alexander almost immediately. He was sitting at a table by the window, looking as relaxed as ever. He waved when he saw her, and she felt a wave of warmth wash over her. As she approached the table, he stood up and pulled out a chair for her. "I'm really glad you could make it," he said with a smile. "Me too," Emily replied, feeling a little more at ease. As they sat down and started talking, the conversation flowed as naturally as it had at the wedding. It was easy. Comfortable. There was no pressure, no expectation. It was just two people talking, sharing stories and laughs. For the first time in a while, Emily felt like she was allowed to just be herself. Alexander seemed genuinely interested in her life, in the little details she sometimes felt were insignificant. It was strange, but in a good way. As they talked, Emily realized she was enjoying herself more than she had expected. The nerves that had initially made her feel uncertain began to fade. She wasn't thinking about what he might expect from her or how she looked. She was just enjoying the moment. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this feeling of being with someone who made her feel like she mattered, just as she was. As Emily sipped her coffee, she realized just how much she had been enjoying the conversation with Alexander. There was something about him that made her feel at ease, like she could share more than just surface-level details. It wasn't the kind of connection she had experienced with anyone before. She had always kept her life focused on what was practical, her son, her job, and just making it through each day. But sitting here with Alexander, she felt like she was allowed to breathe, allowed to be more than just a mom or a worker. She was Emily, and that mattered. "You know," she said, looking up from her cup, "I didn't expect this to feel so easy. I thought meeting up like this would be awkward, but it's not." Alexander smiled, the warmth in his eyes making her feel even more comfortable. "I'm glad to hear that," he replied. "I think sometimes we expect the worst in situations like this. But the truth is, sometimes it's just nice to talk to someone, even if it's only for a short while." Emily nodded, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her cup. "Yeah, I guess I've been so caught up in everything lately that I forgot how nice it is to just talk. To connect." "You've been busy," Alexander said, his tone light but serious. "I can tell. Between work and being a mom, there's probably little time left for anything else, right?" Emily chuckled softly. "You could say that. It's a balancing act, for sure. I'm always running between my job, Ethan's school, and trying to keep up with the bills. It feels like there's never enough time in the day." She paused, realizing she had said more than she usually did about her struggles. "I don't mean to complain," she added quickly. "It's just, it gets overwhelming sometimes." "I understand," Alexander said gently. "I'm not a parent, but I can imagine how much you must juggle. It's hard to have it all together when life throws so many things at you." Emily looked at him, surprised by his empathy. She hadn't expected that from someone like him. He was successful, confident, and seemed to have it all figured out. Yet here he was, understanding her struggle, as though he had been in her shoes. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than before. "It's nice to know I'm not the only one who feels overwhelmed sometimes." "You're definitely not alone," Alexander replied. "And just because you're busy doesn't mean you're not doing a great job. You're a mom, a professional, and you're managing everything as best as you can. That's not easy." Emily felt a small wave of warmth spread through her chest at his words. She wasn't used to hearing those kinds of compliments, especially not from someone she barely knew. But in that moment, they felt genuine, and that made all the difference. They continued talking for a while longer, and as the conversation flowed, Emily found herself opening up more than she had anticipated. They spoke about their families, their childhoods, and the challenges they faced in life. It was a conversation without any pressure, just two people getting to know each other, and Emily realized just how much she needed this. She needed to feel seen, to be reminded that there was more to her than just her responsibilities. And in Alexander's company, she felt that way. When the time came to leave, they both stood up, and Emily felt a bit reluctant to end the meeting. "Thank you for this," she said, giving him a sincere smile. "I didn't realize how much I needed to get out of my routine and just talk to someone." Alexander smiled back, his expression warm. "I'm glad you came. And I'm glad we could talk. It's easy to forget how good it feels to have a conversation without distractions." They both walked to the door of the coffee shop, and as Emily stepped outside, she felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The evening air was cool, but the warmth of their conversation lingered with her. "Maybe we could do this again sometime?" Alexander asked, his voice casual but hopeful. Emily smiled, feeling a flutter of excitement. "I'd like that," she replied. They exchanged a final glance before Emily turned to head home. As she walked back to her car, she found herself thinking about the conversation they had just had. She wasn't sure what would come of this, or where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. For the first time, she felt like there was something beyond the day-to-day grind, something worth looking forward to. And maybe, just maybe, that something had started with a cup of coffee and an unexpected connection. As the days went by, Emily found herself looking forward to her next meeting with Alexander. She hadn't expected to form such a connection with him, but now, every conversation felt like a small moment of relief from the weight of her everyday life. They kept in touch through text, chatting about everything from the weather to random thoughts that popped into their heads. Each message, each exchange, felt effortless and real. It was strange how someone she barely knew had quickly become a constant in her life, but in a way, it was exactly what she needed. Emily had always kept her emotions close, rarely allowing herself to get too attached to anything outside of her son. She didn't have the luxury of time to focus on herself or her personal life, but something about Alexander made her rethink that. He made her feel like she deserved more, like she didn't have to carry the world on her shoulders alone. A week after their coffee date, Alexander suggested they meet again. This time, they agreed to go for a walk in the park. Emily was a bit nervous but excited at the same time. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, and it felt like a good opportunity to just talk and enjoy each other's company. As they met at the park, Emily couldn't help but smile when she saw him waiting by the entrance. He looked relaxed, casually dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, and his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Hey, Emily," he greeted her with a warm smile. "It's great to see you again." "You too," she replied, feeling a small flutter in her chest. They began walking side by side, the sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling around them. For a moment, the world felt quiet, and all that mattered was the conversation they were having. They talked about everything: life, their favorite hobbies, what they were looking forward to in the future. It was the kind of easy conversation that made time feel like it was standing still. As they reached a bench by the lake, Alexander suggested they sit for a while. Emily agreed, and they both sat down, watching the water ripple gently in front of them. I've been thinking a lot about what you said last time, Alexander said after a moment of comfortable silence. About how you juggle everything for Ethan. I really admire that. Emily looked at him, surprised by his words. Thanks, she said softly. It's not always easy, but I do what I can. You're doing more than just what you can, Emily, he said, his voice sincere. You're giving him everything. And that's something special. Emily felt her heart swell at his words. It wasn't often that someone acknowledged the effort she put into raising Ethan. She'd always done it because she had to, but hearing it from Alexander made her realize just how much she sacrificed for her son. It means a lot to hear you say that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander smiled and looked out at the lake. I know it's not easy, but I think you're doing an amazing job. And I'm sure Ethan knows that, even if he doesn't always say it. Emily couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude for him. He had a way of making her feel making her feel like the weight of her responsibilities wasn't all on her alone. As they sat there, the conversation drifted to lighter topics. They joked about the strangest things they had ever eaten, and even shared some embarrassing stories from their pasts. Emily laughed more than she had in a long time, and for the first time in a while, she felt like she was just enjoying the moment. It wasn't about being a mom, a worker, or someone who had to hold it all together. It was just about being Emily, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, they both stood up. I'm really glad we did this, Emily said, smiling at him. Me too, Alexander replied, his eyes soft. It's been nice to just relax and enjoy the day. Yeah, it has, Emily agreed, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in a long time. As they walked back to the entrance, Emily realized that this wasn't just about having someone to talk to. It was about finding a connection, something deeper than she had ever expected. And as she said goodbye to Alexander, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Whatever it was, she knew she was ready to explore it. One step at a time. The days following their walk in the park felt different for Emily. There was something comforting about the way Alexander had made her feel, not just heard, but understood. She couldn't remember the last time she had connected with someone like this, someone who seemed to see her for more than just her responsibilities. It wasn't just a fleeting connection anymore. She found herself looking forward to their texts, to their conversations that never seemed to run dry. It was like they had their own little world in the middle of everything else. Despite the warmth of their connection, Emily couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. She had her own life to manage, and she had never been the type to entertain the idea of something more with someone outside of her world. She had responsibilities, Ethan, her job, and she wasn't sure if there was room for anything else, especially not something as complicated as a relationship. She tried to push those thoughts aside, telling herself that she was just overthinking it. But every time Alexander reached out, it felt different. It wasn't just small talk. There was a depth to their conversations, a realness that made her feel like she could be herself, something she hadn't realized she missed so much. One evening, as Emily was finishing up a report for work, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Alexander. Hey, I was thinking about you today. How's everything going with Ethan? I hope he's doing well. Emily smiled as she read the message. It was the kind of message that made her heart skip a beat, not because it was anything romantic, but because it was genuine. He's doing great, she replied. We've been working on his school projects this week. He's a little bundle of energy, as always. Alexander's next message came quickly. I bet he's lucky to have you. You're doing such an amazing job with him. Emily felt warmth flood her chest. It wasn't the first time he'd complimented her, but it always hit her in a way she didn't expect. She wasn't used to hearing things like that, not from someone who had so much going on in his own life. Thanks, Alexander, she replied, her fingers lingering over the keys. That means a lot to me. There was a pause before his next message came through. I know we're both busy, but I was wondering if you'd like to do something this weekend. Maybe dinner, or something low-key. Just to hang out, no pressure. Emily's heart fluttered. She hadn't expected him to ask her out again. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but it felt like a step forward. She paused for a moment, thinking. Her mind raced with thoughts of Ethan, her schedule, the endless things she had to do. But then, she remembered how good it had felt just to talk to Alexander, how comfortable he made her feel. "I'd like that," she typed finally, after taking a deep breath. "How about Saturday night?" She hit send and set her phone down. A part of her wondered if she was making the right choice. But another part of her felt excited, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She was looking forward to seeing him again, to spending time with someone who made her feel like she mattered beyond her roles. As a mother and a worker. Saturday night arrived, and Emily found herself getting ready with a sense of anticipation she hadn't expected. She kept it simple, a pair of jeans, a blouse she liked, and a light jacket for the cool evening. It wasn't a big deal, but she wanted to look nice. As she stepped out of the door, she couldn't help but smile. She was nervous, but in a good way. When she arrived at the restaurant, she saw Alexander waiting outside, looking casual but put together. He smiled when he saw her. "Hey, Emily," he greeted her, his voice warm. "You look great." Emily blushed, feeling a little shy. "Thanks. You too." They walked inside together, and as they sat down at their table, the conversation picked up easily, just like it always did. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and good food. They talked about everything and nothing, about their favorite books, the best movies they had seen recently, even the little things that made them laugh. For the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel like she was constantly juggling responsibilities. She could just relax and enjoy the moment. By the end of the night, as they said goodbye outside the restaurant, Emily realized something: this wasn't just a casual hangout. It felt like the beginning of something more, something real. She didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time in a long time, she was open to the possibility. Alexander had made her feel like more than just a mother, more than just a worker. He had made her feel like she could be herself, and that was something she hadn't known she needed. "Thanks for tonight," Emily said, smiling at him. "I had a great time." Alexander returned her smile. "Me too. I'm really glad we did this." As she walked back to her car, Emily's heart felt lighter than it had in days. Whatever this was between her and Alexander, she knew it was something worth exploring. The following week, Emily found herself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. Her time with Alexander was quickly becoming a bright spot in her otherwise hectic life. After their dinner, she couldn't stop replaying the moments they had shared. The laughter, the easy conversation, the way he made her feel like she was more than just a mother or a worker. She didn't know what this was yet, but she felt something real stirring inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Despite the growing connection, there was still that lingering sense of doubt. She had her responsibilities, her son, her job, and her routine. She couldn't afford to let anything, or anyone, disrupt that. But whenever she thought about Alexander, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was room for something more. She didn't have to choose between her life as a mother and the possibility of having someone special in her life. That thought both excited and frightened her. Emily had always been so focused on making sure Ethan had everything he needed. She had sacrificed her own wants and desires to be the best mother she could be. Now, though, she was faced with the question of whether she could open herself up to something outside of that. She had never allowed herself to think about her own happiness before. But with Alexander, it felt different. He wasn't asking her to choose between him and her son. He wasn't asking for anything except her company, her time, her honesty. And that was enough. She had been hesitant at first, unsure of where this would lead. But now, she was beginning to feel a sense of clarity. Alexander was patient, understanding, and he didn't try to rush anything. He respected her boundaries, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her, not just as a mother, but as a person. The next weekend, they met again, this time at a local art gallery. Emily had never been much of an art enthusiast, but the idea of spending time with Alexander in a quiet, relaxed setting appealed to her. She was curious about the kind of art he liked, curious about the things that brought him joy beyond his work. They wandered through the gallery, admiring paintings and sculptures, occasionally stopping to chat about their thoughts on the pieces. It was easy, comfortable. At one point, as they stood in front of a modern painting, Alexander turned to her and said, "You know, I didn't expect to enjoy this as much as I am. It's nice to just experience something without thinking about anything else." Emily smiled, her heart warming at his words. "Yeah, I feel the same way. Sometimes, we get so caught up in our own lives that we forget to just enjoy the moment." Alexander looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "Exactly. That's why I like spending time with you. You remind me to slow down, to appreciate the little things." His words caught her off guard. She hadn't realized that her presence could have that effect on him. It made her feel special, in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. They continued to walk through the gallery, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, like their favorite music and movies. Emily found herself laughing more than she expected, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at ease. When the afternoon came to an end, Alexander walked her to her car. "I really enjoyed today," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Me too," Emily replied, her heart feeling full. "It's nice to do something different for a change." "We should do it again sometime," Alexander said with a smile. Emily felt a flutter in her chest. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this way, but she was beginning to realize that she didn't want it to stop. She didn't want to lose this feeling, this connection she had with him. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady despite the excitement she felt inside. As she drove home that evening, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. A few weeks ago, she had never imagined she would be spending her days thinking about anyone other than her son. But now, with Alexander, it felt like there was room for both, her life with Ethan and the possibility of something more with him. It wasn't just a simple attraction. It was something deeper, something that had the potential to grow. And for the first time in a long time, Emily was allowing herself to believe that she deserved it. As the weeks passed, Emily's life seemed to settle into a rhythm. She had her routine, work, taking care of Ethan, and the small moments she now shared with Alexander. Her heart had slowly opened to the idea of him being more than just someone she casually spent time with. Each day that passed, her feelings for him grew stronger, though she still couldn't shake the doubts that lingered in the back of her mind. She had a son to think about, responsibilities that never stopped. But there was something in Alexander's patience, his understanding of her world, that made her think she could have both. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Emily received a text from Alexander. It was simple, just a quick check-in. "How's your day going? Hope everything is good with you and Ethan." Reading his message, Emily couldn't help but smile. He had this way of making her feel like she mattered, like she wasn't just caught in the chaos of life. She quickly replied, "Busy, but good. Ethan's working on his science project, so it's a bit of a madhouse over here." Alexander's response came almost immediately, "Sounds like you've got your hands full. But I'm sure he's doing great with you guiding him." Emily chuckled as she read his message. "He's definitely keeping me on my toes. Thanks for checking in." Alexander's next text surprised her. "I was thinking, we've been spending a lot of time together, and I was wondering if you'd like to meet my family. They're having a small get-together this weekend, and I'd love for you to come." The invitation caught Emily off guard. She had met some of Alexander's friends, but meeting his family felt like a bigger step. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that yet. There was a part of her that wanted to say yes, but another part of her hesitated. She took a deep breath, thinking about the implications of such a step. Would they accept her? Would they accept Ethan? She didn't know, but part of her felt that this could be an important moment. "I'd love to," Emily typed after a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. "But I just want to make sure Ethan will be okay with it. He's still adjusting to me being out there in the world, you know." Alexander's reply was quick, reassuring, "Of course, I completely understand." We can take things slow. No pressure at all. Just thought it'd be nice to have you both there, but we'll figure it out whenever you're ready." His words were kind. Thoughtful. Emily couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over her. Alexander had always been understanding of her need to take things at her own pace, and this was no exception. She felt grateful for that. Over the next few days, she and Ethan discussed the idea. She wanted him to feel comfortable with the idea of meeting someone new, especially someone as important as Alexander. After some discussion, Ethan agreed to join her at the gathering. Saturday came, and Emily found herself standing in front of her closet, wondering what to wear. She wanted to look nice but not too dressy. She opted for a simple yet elegant outfit, something that made her feel confident but still comfortable. When she arrived at Alexander's family's home, she felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. His family was warm and welcoming, and they made her feel at ease almost immediately. They were kind to Ethan, including him in conversations and making him feel part of the group. Emily could see that Alexander's family was different than what she had expected. They weren't looking at her with judgment or curiosity. They were just interested in getting to know her, and that made all the difference. As the evening went on, Emily and Alexander spent time talking with his family, laughing, and enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. She couldn't help but feel grateful for how naturally everything had fallen into place. When the evening came to a close, Alexander walked her and Ethan to the car. "I'm really glad you both came," he said, his voice sincere. "It was great getting to see you with my family. I know it meant a lot to them." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. "I'm glad we came too," she said softly. "It was really nice to see you in that environment, with the people you care about." Alexander reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're a part of my life now, Emily. And that includes the people who are important to me. I want you both to feel like you belong." His words meant more to her than she could express. She nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Alexander. For everything." As she drove home that night, Emily couldn't help but think about how far she had come. A few months ago, she never would have imagined opening up to someone like this. But here she was, taking small steps toward something that felt real. Something that was worth exploring. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that there could be a future where she wasn't just a mother or a worker, but someone who was allowed to have a life of her own, too.